My sister, an airline pilot, called me. I need to ask you something strange. Her husband, is he home right now? Yes, I replied. He's sitting in the living room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That can't be true. Because I'm watching him with another woman right now. They just boarded my flight to Paris. Just then I heard the door open behind me. I need to ask you something strange. Your husband, is he home right now? My sister Kaylee's voice crackled through the phone from the cockpit of United Flight 447. I was standing in our Manhattan apartment kitchen, watching Aiden through the doorway as he sat reading his morning paper. Yes, I said slowly. He's sitting in the living room. The silence that followed felt wrong. Then Kaylee whispered the words that shattered my entire world. That can't be true. Because I'm watching him with another woman right now. They just boarded my flight to Paris. Behind me I heard footsteps. Aiden walked into the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, smiling at me with the same expression he'd worn every morning for 7 years. The coffee mug in his hand was the one I'd bought him for his 40th birthday. White ceramic with "World's Most Adequate Husband," printed in black letters. He'd laughed when he opened it, said it was perfect because he never trusted anyone who claimed to be the best at anything. That was 3 years ago, back when his self-deprecating humor felt charming instead of calculated. Who's calling so early? Aiden asked, moving toward the coffee maker for a refill. His Saturday morning routine never varied. Coffee, Financial Times, light breakfast, then his squash game at the athletic club by 11. I gripped the phone tighter, Kaylee's breathing audible through the speaker. She was waiting for me to say something, to react, to make sense of what couldn't possibly make sense. My husband stood 5 feet away from me in our kitchen. My husband was also apparently sitting in business class at JFK Airport with another woman. Just Kaylee, I managed, surprised at how normal my voice sounded. Pre-flight check-in. Aiden nodded absently, pouring coffee with his left hand while scrolling through his phone with his right. Tell her we said hello. Maybe we'll finally take her up on those flight benefits she's always offering. Before we continue, I want to thank you for listening to these stories of betrayal and strength. If you believe everyone deserves the truth in their relationships, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach others who might need these stories. Now let's see how this deception unravels. The irony of his words made my stomach twist. I watched him move through our kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. 7 years of marriage had created these patterns. Where we kept the sugar, how he liked his coffee, the way he always stood at the counter rather than sitting at the breakfast bar. Kaylee, I'll call you back, I said quietly. Ava, wait. I need to tell you. Her voice carried the same urgency she'd had 3 years ago when she called about Dad's heart attack. That call had come on a Tuesday morning too. I'd been standing in this same kitchen making breakfast when my world tilted off its axis. I'll call you back, I repeated and ended the call. Aiden glanced up from his phone. Everything all right? You look pale. Did I? I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Same auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail, same green eyes my father had given me, same face that had looked back at me every morning for 37 years. But Kaylee's words had changed something fundamental. The kitchen felt different now, like when you notice a picture frame has been hanging crooked for months. Just tired, I said, reaching for my own coffee mug. My hands were steady. 20 years of working as a forensic accountant had taught me to maintain composure when discovering that nothing was what it seemed. COs had sat across from me, lying through their teeth about missing millions, while I nodded and took notes and gathered evidence. You should go back to bed, Aiden suggested, his British accent wrapping around the words with familiar warmth. That accent had charmed me at a mutual friend's dinner party 8 years ago. He'd been explaining the difference between rugby and American football, gesturing wildly with a glass of wine, accidentally spilling it on my dress. His mortification had been endearing. Or had it been? Maybe I will, I said, studying his face. The same angular jaw, the same green eyes with gold flecks, the same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. Every detail exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed. A text from Kaylee, look at this now. A photo appeared. Through an airplane window I could see the interior of business class. There in seat 3B sat a man in a blue Tom Ford suit. The photo was taken from an angle, but the profile was unmistakable. The way he held his head, the curve of his jaw, the particular way he gestured while talking. Aiden. My Aiden. Talking animatedly to a blonde woman who looked about 25, her hand resting on his forearm with casual intimacy. I looked up at the Aiden in our kitchen. Gray cashmere sweater, reading glasses pushed up into his hair, that same wedding ring on his left hand that we'd chosen together at a small jeweler in Soho. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, I think I'll make pancakes. Pancakes? He raised an eyebrow. On a Tuesday? What's the occasion? The occasion was that my sister was watching my husband on a plane while my husband stood in our kitchen, and one of these realities had to be false. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening. Can't a wife make pancakes for her husband without needing a reason? He smiled, that particular half-smile that used to make my heart skip. Of course. Though you know I have squash at 11. Plenty of time, I said, pulling ingredients from the pantry. Flour, eggs, milk. Simple things that made sense. Unlike the photo on my phone showing my husband in 2 places at once. As I measured flour into a bowl, I thought about the small inconsistencies I'd dismissed over the past few months. The night he'd come home from a client dinner smelling like a perfume I didn't recognize. The weekend he'd gone to Boston for a conference that I later couldn't find any record of online. The way he'd been perfect lately. Too perfect. No forgotten anniversaries, no socks left on the bedroom floor, no irritating habits that had once driven me crazy but now seemed oddly absent. I love you, Aiden said suddenly, walking over to kiss my forehead. His lips were warm, familiar. I love you too, I replied automatically, the words hollow as the measuring cup in my hand. He returned to his newspaper, settling back into his morning routine. I watched him turn the pages with precise movements, each gesture exactly as I remembered. But memory, I was learning, could be manufactured. Reality could be edited. And somewhere between my kitchen and JFK Airport, my marriage had split into 2 versions. One of them was a lie. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Kaylee, "Don't let that plane take off." But even as I hit send, I knew it was too late. The engines were already running. The door was already closed. And whatever game was being played in my life had already begun. The sound of the apartment door closing echoed through the hallway as Aiden left for his squash game. I stood at the window watching him exit our building, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, that confident stride unchanged after all these years. He turned left toward the athletic club just as he did every Tuesday and Saturday. Normal. Predictable. Except nothing felt normal anymore. The moment he disappeared around the corner, I moved with purpose toward his home office. The mahogany desk we'd bought at an estate sale in the Hamptons sat beneath his diplomas from Cambridge and Harvard Business School. Everything meticulously organized as always. But organization, I'd learned from years of forensic accounting, often masked the most elaborate deceptions. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint accounts, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the same precision I used when tracking embezzled funds for Fortune 500 companies. The credit card statements loaded slowly, each month revealing a pattern that made my chest tighten. There it was, a charge at the Tokyo Mandarin Oriental from March 15th through 18th. I remembered that weekend clearly. Aiden had supposedly driven to Connecticut to help his mother reorganize her garage after his father's death. I'd offered to go with him, but he'd insisted I stay home and rest after a particularly grueling audit. The hotel charge was for 2 guests. Room service for 2. Spa treatments for 2. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled further. Dubai. The Four Seasons. A weekend when he'd claimed to be at client dinners in Midtown. I'd been home with food poisoning, too sick to question why his client meetings required overnight stays at hotels 40 minutes from our apartment. I pulled up his business credit card next. More hotels. More restaurants I'd never heard him mention. Jewelry purchases from Cartier that had never materialized as gifts for me. My methodical brain, trained to spot financial irregularities, cataloged each discrepancy while my heart tried to rationalize them away. Maybe they were client gifts. Maybe the hotels were for visiting executives. Maybe there was an explanation that didn't involve my husband living an entirely separate life. My phone rang. Sophia Chen's name appeared on the screen. "I'm 15 minutes away," she said without preamble. "And Ava, you need to prepare yourself. What I found, it's extensive." Sophia and I had been roommates at NYU, both studying accounting before our paths diverged. Mine toward forensic investigation, hers toward what she cryptically called private intelligence. Her divorce from Richard, the Wall Street trader who'd been sleeping with his 23-year-old assistant, had transformed her from corporate analyst to someone who specialized in what she called marital reconnaissance. While waiting for her, I continued my investigation. Our joint investment accounts showed regular activity, but when I dug deeper, I found withdrawals I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts. The kind of systematic siphoning I'd seen in countless fraud cases, except this time it was happening in my own accounts. The doorbell rang. Sophia stood there in her typical all-black ensemble, tablet clutched against her chest, her expression grim. She'd worn that same look when she'd discovered Richard's affair, when she'd had to tell me about my father's secret gambling debts after his death, when life demanded brutal honesty between friends. "Show me," I said, leading her to the dining room table. She opened her tablet, fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. "The woman your sister saw him with is Madison Vale. 26 years old. Pharmaceutical sales representative for Silex Industries." A photo appeared, blonde, conventionally beautiful in that polished way that suggested expensive maintenance. "She's been working the Manhattan territory for 2 years. Her social media is mostly private, but I managed to access some tagged photos." The images that followed made my stomach plummet. Madison and Aiden at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Madison and Aiden at what looked like a hotel bar in Miami. Madison and Aiden at a charity gala. The same night I'd been in Boston for a conference. "How long?" My voice sounded distant, like someone else was asking. "Based on the digital footprint, at least 3 months. But Ava, that's not the strangest part." Sophia pulled up another screen. "I accessed your building's security footage through a contact. Look at this." The video showed our apartment building's lobby from last Tuesday. There was Aiden, entering at 6:47 p.m., briefcase in hand. The timestamp matched when he'd arrived home from work. Everything looked normal until Sophia zoomed in. "Watch his shadow," she said. The shadow fell at the wrong angle. It flickered slightly when he passed under the chandelier. Details that would be invisible to casual observation but glaring to someone looking for deception. "This is deep fake technology," Sophia explained. "Someone has been inserting fabricated footage into your building's security system. This isn't amateur work. We're talking about sophisticated software that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement properly." I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process what this meant. Why would someone go to such lengths? That's what we need to figure out. But there's more. She pulled up another file. "I spoke to a few of your neighbors. Discreetly. Mrs. Patterson from 20C mentioned something interesting. Mrs. Patterson, 78 years old, lived alone with her 2 Persian cats, spent most of her time watching the hallway through her peephole. The building's unofficial security system. She said she saw Aiden leaving with suitcases 3 months ago. The weekend you were at that conference in Boston. She remembered specifically because he helped her with her groceries on his way out. Said he was going away for a while. I remembered that weekend. The conference had been mandatory, 2 days of mind-numbing presentations about new SEC regulations. I'd come home Sunday evening to find Aiden cooking dinner, rosemary chicken, my favorite. He'd said he'd spent the weekend organizing his home office and catching up on sleep. The office had looked exactly the same. But I came home and he was here, I said, the words feeling thick in my throat. Was he? Or was someone who looked exactly like him? The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, my accountant's brain trying to create logical columns where none existed. That's insane. People don't just get replaced. No, Sophia agreed, her voice gentle but firm. They don't. Not without significant resources and planning. Ava, has Aiden been working on anything sensitive? Any deals or projects that might make him a target? I thought about his recent work. Mergers, acquisitions, the usual investment banking activities. Nothing that seemed worth this level of elaborate deception. Unless there was something he hadn't told me about. Another secret to add to the growing pile. I need to see more footage, I said, my voice steadier now. Every entry and exit for the past 3 months. Credit card receipts. Phone records. Everything. Sophia nodded, already typing. I'll get what I can. But Ava, you need to be careful. Whoever is doing this, whether it's Aiden or someone else, They've invested serious resources. This isn't a simple affair. This is something else entirely. Sophia left after giving me an encrypted phone to contact her, warning me to act normally until we understood the full scope of what was happening. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of suspended animation, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, organizing files that were already organized, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced through possibilities that seemed increasingly insane. At 5:30 I heard Aiden's key in the lock. The man who might not be Aiden. The stranger who'd been living in my home, sharing my bed, playing the role of my husband with such precision that I'd never questioned it until today. I arranged my face into something resembling calm and started preparing dinner. "Something smells amazing," he called out, same as always. The routine so familiar it felt like muscle memory. I decided to make shrimp scampi, my grandmother's recipe from Naples. The garlic and white wine sauce filled the apartment with its rich aroma. This particular dish held significance in our relationship. The real Aiden had a severe shellfish allergy, documented by 3 emergency room visits over the years. His medical alert bracelet, worn religiously for 7 years, specifically listed shellfish as life-threatening. "Your favorite," I said, setting the plate in front of him. My voice sounded normal, even pleasant. 20 years of maintaining composure during fraud investigations had taught me to compartmentalize panic. He looked at the dish with what appeared to be genuine delight. "You haven't made this in ages." That was true. I hadn't made it because my husband would die if he ate it. But this man picked up his fork without hesitation, twirling the linguine with practiced ease, bringing a shrimp to his mouth with appreciation. No reaction. No swelling. No reaching for an EpiPen. Just a man enjoying his dinner. "This is incredible," he said, taking another bite. "Your grandmother would be proud." My grandmother had been dead for 15 years, but she would have been horrified to see me serving shellfish to someone I was testing like a laboratory specimen. I watched him eat, cataloging every gesture, every expression, looking for the seams in his performance. "So I was thinking," I said, refilling his wine glass with the measured calm of someone discussing the weather, "we should visit your mother this weekend." The real Aiden would have immediately manufactured an excuse. His relationship with his mother was complicated at best, toxic at worst. She'd never approved of me, never forgiven him for marrying outside their social circle. Our visits to Connecticut were carefully rationed, usually requiring weeks of negotiation. "That sounds wonderful," he replied without missing a beat. "She'll be thrilled to see us." Thrilled. His mother had never been thrilled about anything involving me. I felt my phone recording from its position behind the fruit bowl, capturing this conversation that would later serve as evidence of what? That my husband had been replaced by someone who actually liked his mother? "We could stay the whole weekend," I continued, pushing harder. "Help her with that garden project she mentioned." "Perfect. I'll call her after dinner to let her know." The real Aiden would rather have dental surgery without anesthesia than spend a weekend doing manual labor for his mother. This man was failing every test, yet succeeding perfectly at being a better version of my husband. After dinner we settled onto the couch for our usual evening routine. Netflix, mild conversation about our days, the comfortable silence of a long-married couple. Except nothing about this felt comfortable anymore. Every gesture he made, every word he spoke felt like watching a highly skilled puppeteer manipulate strings I couldn't see. "I'm exhausted," I announced at 10, stretching in an exaggerated way. "That audit today really wore me out." "You work too hard," he said, kissing my forehead. The lips were warm, the pressure familiar, but wrong in some indefinable way. In our bedroom I changed into pajamas while he brushed his teeth. The sounds from the bathroom were perfect. The electric toothbrush for exactly 2 minutes, the mouthwash gargle, the face washing routine. Someone had studied my husband's habits with anthropological precision. When he climbed into bed beside me, I forced myself to remain still. He turned on his side, facing away from me, his breathing evening out within minutes. The real Aiden was a chronic insomniac who usually read until well past midnight. This man fell asleep like someone without worries, without secrets, without a stolen identity weighing on his conscience. I waited, counting his breaths, until I was certain he was deeply asleep. Then I slipped out of bed with the careful movements of someone defusing a bomb. His briefcase sat in its usual spot beside the dresser, leather worn soft from years of use. The real Aiden's briefcase, carried by an imposter. Inside, the usual contents appeared normal at first glance. Laptop, various files, business cards. But beneath a stack of investment portfolios, I found an envelope that didn't belong. My fingers trembled as I extracted its contents. A pay stub made out to Marcus Webb, address in Queens. An actors' union card. But most damning were the handwritten notes, pages and pages in someone else's handwriting, documenting my life in excruciating detail. My morning routine, down to which coffee mug I preferred. My speech patterns with certain phrases highlighted. Details about our relationship history that read like a script prepared for an audition. Ava likes her coffee with 1 sugar, no cream. She calls her sister every Tuesday and Thursday. Anniversary is October 15th. She expects flowers but pretends she doesn't. Her father died 3 years ago, sensitive subject. She tears up during the final scene of Casablanca every time. Our entire marriage reduced to bullet points, a character study for someone preparing to play the role of devoted husband. At the bottom of the last page, a note in different handwriting, 3 months maximum. Maintain cover until transfer complete. 3 months. This performance had an expiration date. I slipped the papers back into Marcus's briefcase with trembling fingers, my mind processing the implications of transfer complete. Transfer of what? Our assets? The apartment? My entire life. I photographed each page with the encrypted phone Sophia had given me, then crept back to bed where the stranger wearing my husband's face continued sleeping peacefully. The next morning, Sunday, I watched Marcus perform his morning routine with newfound clarity. Every gesture was studied, every word carefully chosen. When he mentioned needing to go to the gym, I manufactured an urgent client crisis that required immediate attention at my office. He barely looked up from his tablet, waving goodbye with the distraction of someone whose mind was already elsewhere. My office building stood empty on Sunday morning, just security guards and the ghosts of financial crimes. I locked myself in my corner office overlooking Park Avenue and opened my laptop with the determination of someone about to perform surgery on their own life. The forensic accounting software I used to track corporate fraud would now dissect my personal finances. I started with our joint checking account. The past 3 months revealed a pattern so subtle I would have missed it without looking specifically for theft. Transfers of $9,999, just below the federal reporting threshold, moving to accounts I didn't recognize. The receiving banks were in the Caymans, notorious for their privacy laws and resistance to international investigation. Each transfer had been authorized with my husband's credentials, during times when Marcus had been sitting across from me at dinner or sleeping beside me in bed. The real Aiden was somewhere else, systematically bleeding our accounts while his hired double kept me distracted with perfect impersonations of domestic bliss. I traced the money through 3 shell companies, each registered in different jurisdictions, each leading to another dead end. LuxCorp International in the Caymans, Meridian Holdings in Panama, Apex Investments in Cyprus. Corporate structures designed to launder money and hide assets from people exactly like me. The trail went cold at Swiss banks whose privacy laws were legendary. 15 years of savings, investments, and careful financial planning vanishing into numbered accounts I could see but couldn't touch. The scope of the theft made me physically ill. $400,000 from our investment portfolio. $600,000 from the home equity line we'd never used. Another $300,000 from various retirement accounts, all taken as loans that wouldn't trigger immediate alerts. $1.3 million, methodically extracted while I slept next to a stranger who'd memorized my coffee preferences. But the money was just the beginning. When I accessed my professional client database, I found something worse. Login records showed access from IP addresses I didn't recognize, downloads of sensitive financial data from 3 major corporate audits I'd conducted. Information that, in the wrong hands, could facilitate insider trading worth tens of millions. I pulled up Madison Vale's professional profile. Pharmaceutical sales representative seemed like a cover story now. Her LinkedIn showed connections to several hedge fund managers, the kind who operated in legal gray areas and weren't particular about where their information originated. Her travel history on social media aligned perfectly with suspicious trades in pharmaceutical stocks that had occurred just before major FDA announcements. They weren't just stealing from me. They were using my reputation, my access, my client relationships to commit federal crimes. Every unauthorized login, every stolen file, Every suspicious trade would trace back to my credentials. If discovered, I wouldn't just lose money. I'd lose my license, my career, potentially my freedom. I needed help beyond what Sophia could provide. Grace Morrison answered on the third ring, her voice rough with sleep. We'd been friends since she was an ambitious prosecutor and I was testifying as an expert witness in fraud cases. Her divorce from a judge who'd been taking bribes had ended her career at the DA's office but sharpened her understanding of how the system failed women who discovered their husbands were criminals. Ava? It's 7 a.m. on Sunday. I need your help. Can you meet me at my office? Something in my voice must have conveyed the urgency. 20 minutes, she said and hung up. Grace arrived looking like she'd thrown on the first clothes she could find, her prosecutorial instincts still sharp despite 3 years in private practice. I showed her everything: the financial transfers, the stolen client data, the photographs of Marcus's briefcase contents. She studied the evidence with the focused intensity that had once made defense attorneys nervous. This is sophisticated, she finally said. Professional-level identity theft combined with financial fraud and corporate espionage. But here's your problem. Everything is technically authorized. Your husband's credentials were used. His biometrics, his passwords. Without proving he wasn't actually present for these transactions, you're looking at a he said, she said situation. But I have proof that Marcus Webb has been impersonating him. An actor who could claim he was hired for a legitimate reason. Maybe Aiden wanted to surprise you. Maybe it was research for something. Without Aiden here to contradict that story, and with him presumably ready to deny everything from wherever he's hiding, the authorities won't act fast enough. By the time they investigate, the money will be gone and the evidence will disappear. My phone buzzed. Not my regular phone, but the encrypted one Sophia had given me. I'd left it hidden in my desk drawer. The notification showed a new message on an app one didn't recognize. Grace leaned over as I opened it. A single text from an unknown number. Check Aiden's old phone. I looked at Grace. Who else knows about this? Someone who wants you to find something, she said. This feels like breadcrumbs. We drove back to my apartment together. Marcus was still at the gym, his Sunday routine predictable as clockwork. I went straight to Aiden's home office, to the desk drawer where he kept old electronics he claimed to be recycling but never actually disposed of. His previous iPhone sat there, screen cracked from when he dropped it getting out of a taxi 6 months ago. I pressed the power button, not expecting anything. The screen flickered to life. 5% battery but alive. The phone had been receiving messages for months while supposedly broken. I opened the messages with shaking fingers. There was a conversation with Madison Vale going back 8 months. Plans, photos, and details that made my blood run cold. The wife suspects nothing, Aiden had written 3 months ago. Marcus is perfect. By the time she figures it out, we'll be untouchable. The most recent message was from yesterday. Tomorrow we finalize everything. Our usual place in Paris, then disappear forever. Grace stared at the phone screen, her prosecutor's mind already building the case. Tomorrow is Monday. If they're planning to finalize everything, we need to act tonight. I felt something shift inside me, the fear and confusion crystallizing into cold determination. The same focus that helped me unravel million-dollar fraud schemes would now protect what remained of my life. I handed Grace the phone and moved to my laptop with newfound purpose. What are you doing? Grace asked. Setting a trap. Aiden might have stolen my money, but he forgot that I'm the one who knows how to track it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, creating something beautiful in its simplicity. A financial virus disguised as routine investment documents that would appear in our shared cloud storage. The code was elegant, designed to activate the moment anyone accessed our joint accounts from an international IP address. When triggered, it would freeze every transaction, lock down all associated accounts, and simultaneously alert federal investigators to suspicious activity. Is that legal? Grace watched over my shoulder. It's my own account. I'm protecting my assets from theft. Completely legal. I embedded the virus in files labeled Q3 Investment Review and Tax Documents 2024. Aiden's arrogance would be his downfall. He always checked our investments before major decisions, a habit from his banking days that even crime hadn't broken. The apartment door opened. Marcus was back from the gym whistling something tuneless. Grace and I exchanged glances. She understood immediately, slipping Aiden's phone into her purse while I closed my laptop. Working on Sunday again? Marcus appeared in the doorway, gym bag over his shoulder, performance-perfect sweat on his forehead. You really should take a break. Just finishing up, I said, my voice steady. Grace stopped by to discuss a case we're collaborating on. He nodded at Grace with practiced charm. Good to see you. Will you stay for lunch? Actually, I said, standing up, I was thinking we could have lunch at that place in Astoria. You know, where we went after our honeymoon. They had that amazing grilled octopus. Marcus's smile never wavered, but I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. We'd never been to Astoria together. The real Aiden and I had honeymooned in Santorini, not Greece as I'd mentioned. But Marcus didn't know that. Astoria, he repeated, buying time. The little taverna where we danced until dawn. You said it was the most romantic night of your life. Grace watched our exchange like a tennis match, recognizing the test I was administering. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, he said finally. Though I thought it was closed for renovations. A complete fabrication to cover his ignorance. The place I described didn't exist. I smiled warmly, playing the devoted wife while documenting another crack in his performance. You're probably right. Let's just order Thai food instead. The relief in his shoulders was visible. Grace excused herself, taking the evidence with her. As Marcus headed to shower, I made 3 phone calls that would light fires under Aiden's carefully constructed scheme. First, Robert Steinberg, CEO of Steinberg Industries and Aiden's biggest client. I kept my tone conversational, concerned but not alarmed. Robert, I'm so sorry to bother you on Sunday, but I noticed some unusual activity in your company's investment portfolio while reviewing adjacent accounts. Nothing serious, probably just a clerical error, but you might want to have your team take a look. The seed of doubt planted, watered with just enough concern to trigger an internal audit that would discover discrepancies leading back to Aiden's unauthorized access. Second call, Jennifer Wu at Phoenix Capital. Same approach, different angle. A mysterious transfer that didn't match their usual patterns. So strange, probably nothing but worth checking. Third, David Martinez at Meridian Financial. By Monday morning, 3 major firms would be discovering security breaches that all traced back to credentials associated with Aiden Mercer. My phone rang as I ended the 3rd call. The caller ID showed my mother's assisted living facility in New Jersey. My chest tightened. Sunday afternoon calls usually meant medical emergencies. Mrs. Chin. The voice belonged to Nancy, the facility director. Your mother is fine, but she's quite agitated. She insists someone is lying about your husband visiting her. I'll be right there. The drive to New Jersey took 90 minutes, Marcus believing I was handling a crisis with my mother's medication. The facility sat nestled among trees that were just beginning to turn gold, a peaceful setting for lives in their final chapters. My mother's room overlooked the garden, photos covering every surface, her memories made tangible. Ava. She grabbed my hands the moment I walked in, her grip stronger than her 82 years should allow. That woman is lying. I told her Aiden was here last month, but she says there's no record. Nancy stood in the corner looking apologetic. The visitor log shows no entry, but Mrs. Chin is adamant. My mother's dementia made her an unreliable witness in most situations, but she had moments of startling clarity, especially about recent events. Tell me about his visit, Mom. He came on a Thursday. I remember because it was pudding day. He asked about your father's life insurance, wanted to know if there were other policies besides the one you knew about. I told him about the Northwestern Mutual policy, the one your father never told you about. Aiden said he wanted to make sure you were protected. My blood turned to ice. There had been another policy, one I discovered only after Dad's death. $500,000 that had gone to pay for Mom's care. Few people knew about it. Did he ask about anything else? The safety deposit box. He wanted to know which bank, what was in it. I told him about your father's coin collection, the one he thought would be valuable someday. I kissed her forehead, promising to come back soon, and stepped into the hallway with Nancy. Check your security footage from last month. Every Thursday. Nancy pulled up the files on her tablet. We scrolled through weeks of footage, residents coming and going, families visiting, staff changes. Then there he was. August 15th, 2:47 p.m. Aiden walking through the front door, signing the visitor log, spending 43 minutes with my mother. But the log. Nancy pulled up the physical sign-in sheet, photographed and archived. Aiden's name wasn't there. The page showed a gap as if that line had been skipped entirely. He signed it, Nancy said, bewildered. I watched him sign it. Someone had digitally altered the archived image, removing his signature with surgical precision. But they hadn't thought to check the security footage. Aiden had been planning this for months, gathering information about every asset, every policy, every possible source of money. He'd even targeted my mother, mining her confused memories for financial details. I drove back from New Jersey with Nancy's security footage saved on my phone, another piece of evidence in the growing mountain of Aiden's deception. The Sunday evening traffic moved slowly, giving me time to process the calculated cruelty of visiting my mother, extracting financial information from a woman whose mind drifted between decades like a radio searching for signals. My phone buzzed with a message from Kaylee. Her flight had landed at Charles de Gaulle 3 hours ago. The attached photos made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. Aiden and Madison at the airport currency exchange, his hand on the small of her back with casual intimacy. Another photo showed them getting into a taxi, Madison's head tilted toward his shoulder, both of them laughing at something on his phone. The timestamp showed 4:47 p.m. Paris time. The next photo stopped my breathing for a moment. They stood at the reception desk of the Hotel Lancaster on the Champs-Élysées, a place where rooms started at €800 per night. Madison wore a diamond bracelet I recognized, the one Aiden had supposedly bought for his mother's 70th birthday 6 months ago. The body language between them spoke of practiced comfort, the kind that develops over years, not months. The way she adjusted his collar, the way he guided her through the lobby with proprietary confidence. This wasn't a recent affair. This was a relationship that might have predated our entire marriage. I pulled into our building's garage at 8:30 to find Marcus pacing near the elevator, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, his face rearranged itself into concern, but not fast enough to hide the flash of anxiety underneath. "There you are," he said, ending his call abruptly. "I was getting worried. How's your mother?" "She's fine. Just confused about some old financial documents." I watched him process this, saw the slight relaxation in his shoulders when I didn't elaborate. Back in our apartment, I made a decision that would either expose everything or destroy my chance at justice. Sitting across from Marcus at our dining table, I pulled out my phone with deliberate casualness. "I've been thinking," I said, scrolling through my calendar. "Our anniversary is coming up next month. 8 years since that dinner party where we met." Marcus nodded, his actor's training keeping his expression neutral despite the fact that Aiden and I had been married for 7 years, not 8. Another test failed. "I want to do something special. A surprise party. Tuesday morning before the markets open. Invite all your colleagues from the firm, your biggest clients. Show them the apartment, serve champagne and those little pastries from that French place you love." His eyes flickered with confusion. "Tuesday morning? That's unusual timing for a party. You always said the best deals happen before breakfast. Besides, it would be memorable. Different." I pulled up my contacts, letting enthusiasm color my voice. "I'll handle everything. You just need to send the invites tonight. Make it sound exclusive, urgent. Tell them it's important they attend." Marcus hesitated, clearly trying to figure out if this was part of his script or something unexpected. But refusing would break character, and maintaining his cover was paramount. "If that's what you want," he said finally. "Perfect. Send them now while I make dinner. I want to see their responses." I watched him compose the message on his phone, his fingers moving reluctantly across the screen. Investment banking colleagues, major clients, people whose presence would be impossible to explain away when federal agents arrived. Within minutes, responses started coming in. Confusion mixed with agreement. "When Aiden Mercer requested your presence, you showed up." While preparing our last dinner together, I felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for Marcus Webb. He was a failed actor from Queens who'd thought he was getting a break, playing a role for what he probably assumed was a reality show or an elaborate prank. Instead, he'd become an accessory to federal crimes, trapped in a performance where the stakes were prison sentences, not bad reviews. I made salmon with asparagus, simple and quick. Marcus sat at the kitchen island, maintaining the illusion of domestic normalcy while both of us knew something had fundamentally shifted. The script he'd memorized no longer matched the scene being played. Wine, I offered, holding up a bottle of the Malbec we usually shared on Sunday nights. He shook his head quickly. I'm not feeling well. Think I might be coming down with something. The first time in 3 months he'd refused alcohol. His instincts were screaming warnings, even if his conscious mind hadn't fully processed the danger. I poured myself a glass, needing the liquid courage for what was coming. Marcus, I said quietly, and his whole body went rigid. I never called Aiden by the wrong name. I know who you are. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. His face cycled through emotions: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. When he spoke, the British accent was gone, replaced by pure Brooklyn. How long have you known? Since Tuesday morning, when my sister saw the real Aiden boarding a plane while you sat in our living room. He put his head in his hands, the gesture so genuinely human that my anger flickered. I didn't know. About the crimes, I mean. He said you were separated, that he needed someone to house sit, keep up appearances for business reasons. Paid me $20,000 in cash to pretend to be him for 3 months. I thought it was weird but legal. Did you really believe that? I wanted to. His voice cracked slightly. I've been auditioning for 15 years. Waiting tables, driving delivery trucks, watching younger actors get the parts one wanted. Then this guy shows up, offers me more money than I've ever seen to play a role. I didn't ask questions because I couldn't afford to. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. FBI moving tomorrow morning. Everything is in place. I looked at Marcus, this stranger who'd slept in my bed, eaten at my table, participated in a deception that had destroyed my life. But sitting across from him now, seeing the defeat in his shoulders, I recognized another victim of Aiden's manipulation. Tomorrow morning, federal agents are going to arrive. The people you invited will be here to witness it. You can either be arrested as a co-conspirator or cooperate as a witness. Witness, he said immediately. God witness. I have documents, recordings. He made me keep everything in case you got suspicious. Said it was insurance. Marcus spent the night on our couch after showing me a storage unit key where he'd kept everything. Contracts, recordings of phone calls with Aiden, detailed instructions for maintaining the deception. We barely slept, both of us waiting for the dawn that would end this elaborate performance. At 5:47 a.m. my phone rang. They got them, Kaylee said, her voice carrying exhaustion and satisfaction in equal measure. French police arrested them at Charles de Gaulle. They were trying to board a connecting flight to Switzerland. I put her on speaker so Marcus could hear. He sat up on the couch, the blanket I'd given him pulled around his waist, looking like a man about to hear his own verdict. The arrest was dramatic, Kaylee continued. They were in the premium lounge when police arrived. Madison started crying, claiming she didn't know anything about any crimes. But Aiden, his composure finally cracked. He tried to run. They tackled him right there in front of everyone. Someone filmed it. It's already on European news channels. Marcus closed his eyes, perhaps realizing how close he'd come to being in those handcuffs himself. I walked to the kitchen and began making coffee, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The apartment would soon fill with witnesses to the culmination of Aiden's deception. By 7:30 a.m. the first guests began arriving. Robert Steinberg from Steinberg Industries, looking confused but curious. Jennifer Wu from Phoenix Capital, dressed impeccably despite the unusual hour. David Martinez, several junior partners from Aiden's firm, clients whose portfolios represented billions in managed assets. They clustered in our living room, accepting coffee and making awkward small talk about the mysterious urgency of the invitation. This better be worth it, Aiden, Robert said to Marcus, who stood frozen by the window. I canceled a breakfast meeting with the Seoul team. Marcus looked at me, panic evident in his eyes. The script hadn't prepared him for this. I stepped forward, playing the gracious hostess one final time. Thank you all for coming. I know the timing is unusual, but you'll understand in a moment why your presence is so important. At 7:58 a.m. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Marcus heard them too, his face going pale. The doorbell rang once, formally, followed immediately by firm knocking. Federal agents. We have a warrant. The room erupted in confused murmurs as I opened the door. 6 FBI agents entered, their presence immediately transforming our apartment from social gathering to crime scene. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, held up her credentials. Agent Sarah Brennan, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We're looking for Aiden Mercer. That's me, Marcus said, his Brooklyn accent bleeding through the British veneer. Except it's not. I mean, he looked at Agent Brennan with desperate relief. I want to cooperate. I have evidence. I was hired to impersonate him. The room fell silent except for someone's coffee cup hitting a saucer too hard. Robert Steinberg's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jennifer Wu pulled out her phone, probably calculating her firm's exposure to whatever was unfolding. Mr. Webb, Agent Brennan said, clearly already knowing his real name, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. As they cuffed Marcus, he looked at me with something like gratitude. The storage unit on Queens Boulevard, he said quickly. Unit 447. Everything's there. While agents read Marcus his rights, my laptop chimed with a notification I'd been expecting. The financial virus had activated. On my screen, I watched in real time as accounts across the Caymans, Switzerland, and Cyprus froze simultaneously. $47 million in stolen funds, locked in digital amber. Transaction records automatically forwarded to federal prosecutors, the IRS, the SEC. Every agency that Aiden thought he'd evaded now had a complete record of his crimes. Mrs. Mercer, Agent Brennan approached me while her team secured Marcus. We'll need you to come with us for a formal statement. Of course. But first, these people deserve to know why they're here. I picked up my phone, finding the recording of Kaylee's call from Tuesday morning. Her voice filled the room, clear and professional. I need to ask you something strange. Your husband, is he home right now? The recording played through those first moments of discovery. The gathered executives listened with growing comprehension, understanding dawning on their faces. They weren't here for an anniversary party. They were witnesses to the unraveling of a massive fraud that could have destroyed their companies. Your husband, Agent Brennan addressed the room while her team worked, has been stealing corporate secrets and facilitating insider trading using information obtained through his wife's forensic accounting work. The man you've been meeting with for the past 3 months was Mr. Webb, hired to maintain the illusion while the real Aiden Mercer attempted to flee with stolen assets. David Martinez sank into our couch, calculating his firm's exposure. Jennifer Wu was already on the phone with her legal team. But Robert Steinberg walked over to me, his expression shifting from shock to something like admiration. You figured it out. You set this up. I nodded, exhausted suddenly. He counted on me not noticing. Or not being able to prove it if I did. The audit irregularities you mentioned Sunday were real. Your systems were compromised. But now the FBI has everything they need to trace exactly what was taken and how. Agent Brennan's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, then looked at me. French authorities confirmed they have Aiden Mercer and Madison Vale in custody. They'll be extradited to face charges here. The apartment that had been our home, our sanctuary, was now a crime scene. Agents photographed everything, collected evidence, treated our life together as exhibits in a federal case. The assembled witnesses gradually left, each stopping to offer awkward condolences or confused gratitude. As the last agent prepared to leave, Agent Brennan handed me a card. We'll need you to testify. Your forensic work, the virus you created to track the money, it's the foundation of our case. I'll be there, I said, meaning it. The apartment fell silent. I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of Marcus's last performance. His coffee cup still on the counter, the blanket he'd used on the couch, the notes he'd hidden throughout the apartment to remember his lines. Props in a play that had finally ended. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Video from Charles de Gaulle, shaky but clear. Aiden in handcuffs, his perfect composure shattered, being led through the airport while travelers stopped to stare. Madison beside him, designer makeup streaked with tears, her Parisian dream ending in French police custody. I watched the video one more time before closing my laptop. Aiden's arrest playing out in grainy airport footage that had somehow become the most watched clip on financial news channels. The timestamp in the corner read 6 months ago, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since that Tuesday morning when my world split in two. The apartment stood empty around me now, our furniture sold or donated, walls bearing pale rectangles where artwork once hung. The movers had taken the last boxes yesterday, leaving only the echoes of a marriage that had been more performance than partnership. I stood at the windows overlooking Manhattan, keys heavy in my hand, waiting for the building manager who would take possession in 20 minutes. The divorce proceedings had moved with unusual speed once federal prosecutors presented their case. Aiden's attorney, working from a French detention center while fighting extradition, had little leverage against evidence of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge, a woman who'd seen enough financial crimes to recognize predatory behavior, had been particularly unsympathetic to a husband who'd hired an actor to replace himself while liquidating marital assets. The settlement left me with more than I'd expected. The apartment sale proceeds recovered funds from the frozen accounts, and damages that Aiden's insurance company paid rather than face a public trial. Money couldn't buy back 3 months of sleeping next to a stranger or 7 years with a man capable of such deception, but it could buy freedom to rebuild. My phone rang, showing a client appointment reminder. The irony wasn't lost on me that my trauma had become my specialty. The office space I'd leased in the Flatiron district bore a simple brass nameplate: Chin Forensic Consulting, specialist in marital asset protection and identity verification. What started as word-of-mouth referrals had grown into a waiting list of women who suspected their realities had been edited. Just last week, I'd helped a surgeon from the Upper East Side discover her husband of 15 years had been using deepfake technology to appear at medical conferences while actually running a separate practice in Miami. The week before, a Broadway producer learned her spouse had hired 3 different lookalikes to maintain alibis across multiple cities. Each case felt like excavating layers of deception with the same tools that had saved my own life. The building manager arrived, accepting the keys with professional detachment. As I rode the elevator down for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from Kaylee. "Giovanni's at 7? My treat." Giovanni's hadn't changed in 40 years. Still serving the same red sauce recipes our grandmother had declared the only acceptable Italian food outside of Naples. The vinyl booths remained patched with duct tape, the checkered tablecloths bore decades of wine stains, and the owner's son still couldn't pronounce bruschetta correctly despite being third-generation Italian-American. Kaylee waited at our usual corner booth, a bottle of Chianti already open. She stood when she saw me, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than necessary. We'd grown closer through this ordeal, the shared trauma creating a bond that went beyond sisterhood. "You did it," she said, pouring wine into glasses that looked like they'd survived both world wars. "The apartment's really gone?" "Handed over the keys 20 minutes ago." I took a sip, the cheap wine tasting like childhood Sunday dinners. "Feels strange. 7 years erased in an afternoon." "Not erased. Transformed." Kaylee raised her glass. "To the woman who figured out her husband was in 2 places at once and brought down an international fraud ring. To the pilot who made the phone call that saved my life," I countered. We drank, the ritual of it more important than the wine. Kaylee had carried guilt about that morning for months, convinced she'd destroyed my marriage with one phone call. I'd tried explaining that she'd revealed the destruction, not caused it, but survivor's guilt doesn't respond well to logic. "I have something for you," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It arrived at my building yesterday, addressed to you, care of me." The return address showed Dayton, Ohio. Marcus Webb's handwriting, careful and precise. I opened it slowly, not sure I wanted to hear from the man who'd lived my life for 3 months. "Dear Ava," the letter began, "I wanted to reach out now that the legal proceedings are finished. First, thank you for not pressing additional charges. The FBI had enough without your testimony to give me probation and community service instead of prison time. I'm teaching acting classes at a community college here, finally using my skills for something honest. I tell my students about those 3 months, about how the best performance of my life was also the worst thing I'd ever done. Some roles, I tell them, aren't worth playing no matter how much they pay. I think about you sometimes, wondering how someone recovers from what Aiden did. Then I read about your new firm, about the women you're helping, and I understand that you've turned poison into medicine. That's a kind of strength I didn't know existed. The storage unit had one item I didn't give the FBI. A photo from your wedding that was in Aiden's instruction packet. You looked genuinely happy. I'm sorry I was part of taking that from you. I hope someday you find something real to replace what was stolen. With sincere regret and genuine admiration, Marcus Webb. Folded inside the letter was the photograph, Aiden and me cutting our wedding cake, both of us laughing at something off camera. I studied my younger self, trying to remember what had been funny enough to cause such genuine joy. The memory wouldn't come. He seems genuinely sorry, Kaylee observed, reading over my shoulder. He was a victim too in his way. Aiden destroyed multiple lives chasing money that's now frozen in federal custody. I tucked the photo back in the envelope. Marcus just had the misfortune of being desperate enough to take the role. We ordered our usual, pasta arrabbiata for me, linguine vongole for Kaylee, with enough garlic bread to concern a cardiologist. The familiar flavors tasted like home, like continuity in a life that had been completely reimagined. What's next? Kaylee asked, spinning pasta with practiced ease. Rebecca Harrison tomorrow. CEO of a tech startup. She thinks her husband might be using AI to fake business trips. Then Thursday, the Whitman case. I meant for you. Not work. You. I considered the question, letting it sit between us like another dinner guest. 6 months ago, I'd thought my future was mapped out in comfortable predictability. Now, at 37, I was single, successful in a field I'd invented, and completely uncertain about everything except my next client appointment. I don't know, I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. And that's oddly liberating. If this story of calculated revenge kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Ava served Aiden his favorite shrimp scampi, knowing he was deathly allergic and watching the imposter eat it without a single reaction. What was your most jaw-dropping moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of betrayal and justice. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. You've got 5 minutes, my father-in-law, the boss, snapped before the $5 million pitch. He wanted to see me crumble. I had no notes, no deck, just my phone and a deep breath. 30 minutes later, the room fell silent. Then the client smiled and said something I'll never forget. 5 minutes, Sophia. Colton's voice sliced through the morning air as I reached for my coffee mug. My father-in-law stood in my office doorway, gray eyes glinting with something that made my spine straighten. The Morrison team just arrived. They're waiting in conference room 1. My hand froze midway to the mug. The Morrison presentation was tomorrow. My laptop was locked in IT. 8 weeks of preparation and he was giving me 5 minutes. That's impossible, I started. For minutes now, he said, checking his Rolex. Better hurry. If you've ever been underestimated at work or faced sabotage from those in power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share stories of women who refuse to be silenced. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes, the expensive heels Gregory had bought me for our anniversary. Colton didn't even glance down at the mess. He just stood there, blocking my doorway, savoring this moment he'd clearly orchestrated. My materials are at the printer, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. The presentation deck is on my laptop in IT. You know this. Then you'd better get creative. He stepped aside with mock courtesy. 3 minutes, Sophia. Don't keep Victoria Morrison waiting. Victoria Morrison. The CEO who'd flown in from Boston specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The woman who controlled a $5 million contract that could transform Whitmore Analytics' pharmaceutical division. She was sitting in conference room 1 right now, expecting a presentation I couldn't give. I grabbed my phone from the desk, the only thing I had. My fingers shook as I pulled up my notes app, trying to access the cloud backup. Access denied. Company security protocols. Of course. This is sabotage, I said, meeting Colton's eyes directly. This is business. His smile was razor thin. Real executives adapt. Though I suppose that's hard to understand when you marry into success rather than earn it. 3 years. 3 years of these subtle cuts, these careful undermining comments. 3 years of pretending I didn't notice how he credited my wins to Gregory's influence while ensuring my failures were mine alone. But this wasn't subtle anymore. This was war. I pushed past him, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The executive hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Through the glass walls I could see my colleagues at their desks, some glancing up with curiosity, others with something that looked like pity. They knew. Everyone knew what was happening. 2 minutes, Colton called after me loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The bathroom was closer than the conference room. I ducked inside, my hands gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My face was pale but composed. The dark circles Emma had noticed at lunch yesterday were hidden under concealer. My hair was perfect. I'd styled it this morning thinking about tomorrow's presentation, not knowing Colton had already moved the pieces on his chessboard. 8 weeks of work. 8 weeks of studying Morrison Pharmaceuticals' market patterns, their drug pipeline, their competition. I'd built a predictive analytics model that could revolutionize how they tracked physician prescribing patterns. It was all in my head, but how could I present it with nothing but my phone? 1 minute, Colton's voice echoed from the hallway. I straightened my jacket, wiped the coffee splatter from my shoes with a paper towel and walked out. The conference room loomed ahead, its glass walls revealing the scene inside. 8 executives arranged around the polished table. Victoria Morrison at the head, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, fingers drumming against her portfolio. Colton stood by the door like a sentinel. "Your presentation, Mrs. Whitmore?" He emphasized the last name, reminding everyone I was here by marriage, not merit. "Right here," I said, holding up my phone. His eyebrows rose in manufactured surprise. "That's rather unconventional. So is moving a meeting up 24 hours without notice?" I opened the door before he could respond. The room fell silent as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. Victoria Morrison's expression was glacial. "Ms. Morrison," I began, then caught myself. "Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for making time today. We were told the presentation was ready." Her voice could have frozen water. "We've flown in specifically for this." "It is ready." I set my phone on the table, screen up, fighting to keep my hands steady. "But before I begin, I'd like to understand something. What's the one insight about your prescriber data that would fundamentally change your market approach?" Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. "We've covered our requirements extensively," the CFO said, shifting in his Italian leather chair. "In the preliminary meetings. Requirements and revelations are different things." I pulled up my phone's calculator app, the only tool I had. "You're launching Oncoprex next quarter. Every analytics firm you've met has shown you beautiful dashboards, tracking prescription rates, regional adoption, physician demographics, standard metrics, safe predictions." Victoria leaned forward slightly. Just an inch, but I caught it. "But that's not what keeps you awake at night, is it?" I started sketching numbers on my phone screen, holding it up so they could see my rough calculations. "The FDA approved Oncoprex for second-line treatment. But your real market, your $5 million question, is first-line prescription. You need to know which doctors will take that leap and why." The room's energy shifted. The CFO stopped fidgeting with his pen. "Traditional analytics track what physicians prescribe," I continued, my confidence building as I fell into the rhythm of the data I'd lived with for 8 weeks. "But you need to predict what they're thinking before they prescribe. The hesitation patterns. The patient profiles that trigger conservative versus aggressive treatment choices." I turned my phone sideways, using the Note app to sketch a rough diagram. "There's a 3-second pause in electronic prescribing systems when doctors consider off-label use. 3 seconds that your current analytics can't capture, but that predicts market adoption 6 months out." "How could you possibly know that?" Victoria asked, but her tone had changed. Less ice, more interest. "Because I spent 6 weeks analyzing prescription timing data from public health databases. Not the prescriptions themselves, the metadata around them. The hesitations. The revised entries. The cancelled and resubmitted orders. It's all there if you know how to look." I was in my element now, despite having nothing but my phone and my memory. This was my 8 weeks of work distilled to its essence. No fancy slides, no polished graphics. Just the raw insights that mattered. "Your competitors are tracking what happened," I said, meeting Victoria's eyes directly. "I can show you what's about to happen." Through the glass wall, I saw Colton's expression. The smug satisfaction had drained from his face. This wasn't going according to his plan. He'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to fail spectacularly. Instead, I was doing something else entirely. "Continue," Victoria said, and for the first time she smiled. For 25 minutes, I walked them through algorithms I'd developed, Market patterns I'd discovered, physician behavior models that existed only in my memory. My phone battery dropped to 12%. Sweat gathered between my shoulder blades, but I kept my voice steady, professional, even as I felt Colton's presence burning through the glass wall behind me. The 3-second hesitation pattern, Victoria said, tapping her manicured nail against the table. Show me the math behind it. I turned my phone sideways, using my calculator app to work through the statistical correlation. My fingers flew across the tiny screen, each tap a small act of defiance against the man who'd orchestrated this ambush. Public health databases show prescription entries averaging 11 seconds for standard medications, I explained, holding up the screen. But for off-label use of oncology drugs, that average jumps to 14.3 seconds. That 3-second gap? It represents physician uncertainty. Track it across thousands of prescriptions, and you can predict which doctors will become early adopters. The CFO leaned forward. Our current analytics firm hasn't mentioned anything about timing patterns. Because they're looking at outcomes, not process. I switched to my notes app, sketching a rough timeline. They're telling you what happened last quarter. I'm showing you what will happen next quarter. Through the glass, I caught Beth watching from her desk, Colton's secretary who'd witnessed 3 years of his calculated cruelty. She gave me the slightest nod, invisible to everyone else, but I saw it. Even she knew what this was. A public execution that was somehow becoming something else. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria said, and I noticed she dropped the uncertainty from her voice. You said you have a working prototype? My stomach tightened. The prototype dashboard was sitting in pieces on my desk, waiting for tomorrow's assembly. The prototype exists. It's just not physically here. Because the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes shifted from me to Colton, who'd somehow materialized in the doorway. He entered with that practice smile, the one he used for damage control. Technical difficulties are unfortunate, he said smoothly. Perhaps we should reschedule when Sophia is better prepared. I disagree. Victoria's voice cut through his attempted save. I've sat through 47 vendor presentations in my career. 47 PowerPoints full of promises and projections. This is the first time someone has shown me the thinking behind the solution. She stood and the room seemed to hold its breath. My phone chose that moment to flash its 10% battery warning. However, Victoria continued, walking around the table toward me, I need to know this isn't just theoretical. Can you demonstrate even a basic proof of concept? My mind raced. The prototype was in pieces. My laptop was locked away. But I had something else. The beta testing account I'd created on my personal tablet sitting in my desk drawer 20 feet away. Give me 90 seconds, I said. Colton's voice was sharp. Sophia, I don't think. 90 seconds, Victoria interrupted him, checking her Cartier watch. Starting now. I walked out of the conference room with as much composure as I could manage, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble. Don't run, I told myself. Running would look desperate. But my pace was just short of a sprint. My office door was locked. Of course it was. My keycard was in my laptop bag in IT. Looking for this? Beth appeared beside me holding her master keycard. She swiped it without a word and I squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. 30 seconds gone. I yanked open my drawer, grabbed the tablet and powered it on. The loading screen felt eternal. Come on, come on. 50 seconds. Colton announced from the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear. He wanted the whole floor to witness this. The tablet finally loaded. I pulled up the beta dashboard, my fingers flying through the login screen. The interface was rough, unpolished, but it worked. It showed real data, real patterns, real predictions. Time's up, Colton called. I walked back into the conference room with 5 seconds to spare, tablet in hand. Your proof of concept, I said, connecting it to the room's display screen. The dashboard filled the wall, rough around the edges but functional. Real-time prescription data flowed across the screen, heat maps showing hesitation patterns, predictive models calculating adoption rates. This is live data? Victoria asked, standing to get a closer look. From the last 30 days. Public databases only, of course. But watch this. I selected a specific region, zooming into prescription patterns for their competitor's drug. See this cluster of prolonged decision times? These physicians are prime targets for Oncoprex education. They're hesitating on your competitor's drug, which means they're looking for alternatives. The room erupted in quiet discussion. Victoria's team huddled, pointing at different aspects of the dashboard, their excitement palpable. This wasn't what they'd expected from a corporate analytics presentation. How long have you been developing this? Victoria asked. 8 weeks of focused development. 2 years of conceptual work. Alone. I felt Colton's presence behind me, his breathing slightly elevated. The concept and execution are mine. The Whitmore Analytics team would handle implementation and scaling. Victoria nodded slowly, then turned to face Colton directly. Mr. Whitmore, you have an exceptional analyst here. She's family, Colton said, the words sounding like they were choking him. We nurture talent at Whitmore Analytics. Interesting. Victoria's smile was sharp. Because this felt very much like a trial by fire. Moving a meeting up 24 hours, presenting without materials. Some might call that setting someone up to fail. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'm sure there was a miscommunication, Colton said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. I'm sure. Victoria turned back to me. Mrs. Whitmore, or do you prefer Ms.? Either is fine. I have one condition for moving forward with this contract. She pulled out her business card, the thick cardstock catching the light. You lead this project. Not a team, not a committee. Personally. My heart hammered against my ribs. I would be honored. No one else touches this without your approval. Not your husband, not anyone. Her eyes flicked to Colton. Is that acceptable to Whitmore Analytics? Colton's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Around us, his employees watched through the glass walls. This was his company, his domain, and Victoria Morrison had just crowned me in front of everyone. Of course, he managed. Whatever the client requires. Victoria handed me her card. Not to Colton. To me. My direct line is on the back. Call me tomorrow, when the meeting was actually supposed to happen, and we'll discuss terms. As her team filed out, Victoria lingered by my shoulder. Her voice was low, meant only for me. I've been in this business 20 years. I know sabotage when I see it. I also know talent when I see it. She glanced at Colton, who was trying to intercept her CFO. Don't let them dim your light. She swept out of the conference room, her team falling in line behind her. The silence they left was deafening. Colton stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. His trap had snapped shut all right. But somehow I wasn't the one caught in it. The conference room door clicked shut behind Victoria Morrison, and for a moment nobody moved. Colton stood frozen by the window, his reflection in the glass showing something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Then, like a switch flipping, his face hardened back into its familiar mask of control. My office. Now. He didn't wait for a response, just strode out, expecting us to follow like obedient dogs. Gregory finally moved from where he'd been hovering by the door. He touched my elbow just barely, then pulled his hand back as if I might burn him. Come on, Sophie. Let's not make this worse. Worse. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. The executive elevator ride was suffocating. Colton faced forward, jaw clenched. Gregory studied his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. I watched the floor numbers climb, each ding marking another second closer to whatever explosion was coming. Colton's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and a sitting area designed to make visitors feel small. He positioned himself behind the desk immediately, reclaiming his throne. Sit, he commanded. I'll stand. Gregory made a small pained sound. He took the chair furthest from his father, still refusing to look at me directly. You went completely off script, Colton said, his voice low and dangerous. That presentation wasn't what we approved. There was no we involved. I developed that presentation alone, for a meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow. Are you suggesting I deliberately sabotaged you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before I could answer, Gregory spoke, but not to me. Dad, is she? Are you saying she's lying about the meeting time? The words hit harder than any slap. My own husband asking his father instead of me. Seeking Colton's version of the truth rather than mine. I'm not suggesting anything. I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. I'm stating facts. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 2. My laptop is in IT for updates that were mysteriously required this morning. The printed materials are at the copy center, scheduled for pickup tonight. Circumstances change in business, Colton said smoothly. Successful executives adapt. And unsuccessful ones create circumstances designed to make others fail. Gregory's head snapped up. Sophie, you can't just accuse. What? Tell the truth. I turned on him then. Where were you during that presentation, Gregory? Playing golf? Getting coffee? Anywhere but standing beside your wife while your father tried to destroy my career. I didn't know. You never know. That's the problem. You never want to know. Colton leaned back in his chair, watching us fight with something like satisfaction. Regardless of your paranoid theories, Sophia, the fact remains that you've overstepped. Victoria Morrison may have been impressed by your little improvisation, but you work for Whitmore Analytics. Every client relationship, every innovation, every idea you develop here belongs to the company. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, that's not entirely accurate. I pulled up the document I'd been saving for 3 years. The one Gregory had never bothered to read when I'd asked him to review it before signing. Section 7, subsection 3 of my employment agreement. Intellectual property developed outside of standard working hours using personal resources remains the property of the employee. Colton's expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten on his desk. You're suggesting that dashboard was personal work? I'm not suggesting. I'm stating. The predictive hesitation algorithm, the temporal pattern recognition system. I developed those on my own time, filed provisional patents under my maiden name. Sophia Chin, not Whitmore. I showed him my phone screen, the patent office confirmation emails dated over the past 2 years. Every innovation I showed Morrison today is legally mine. The silence was deafening. Gregory stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You've been filing patents? He asked. Without telling me. I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But you were always too busy, too tired, or too focused on keeping your father happy to listen. Colton stood slowly, his movements controlled. You may own some algorithms, but you're still bound by your employment contract. And your marriage contract. The non-compete clause. Only applies if I'm terminated for cause or if I divorce Gregory and join a competitor. I know exactly what I signed. I met his stare directly. Just like I know about Chicago. About Morrison Pharmaceuticals. About how your division there collapsed after you lost their account. The color drained from Colton's face. Gregory looked between us, confused. What's she talking about, Dad? Nothing. Ancient history. But Colton's voice had lost its edge. Victoria Morrison remembers it differently. She remembers your rigid thinking and failure to adapt. Her words, not mine. The desk phone rang. Colton ignored it. It rang again. Then his cell phone started buzzing. Mr. Whitmore? Beth's voice came through the intercom. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They've heard about the Morrison presentation. Tell them I'll call back. Sir, they're already here. In the main conference room. Gregory stood. Dad, what's happening? But I knew. Victoria Morrison didn't just run a pharmaceutical company. She sat on 3 corporate boards. She played golf with our chairman. She just watched Colton try to sabotage his own employee, and she was the type of woman who didn't let that slide. We should go, Gregory said, reaching for my arm. I pulled away. You go. I have work to do. Sophie, please. We need to talk. We needed to talk 3 years ago. 2 years ago. 6 months ago. Every time your father humiliated me in meetings, stole credit for my work, or scheduled family dinners that made it clear I'd never be family. Where were you then? He had no answer. He never did. I left them there and walked back to my office. The floor was buzzing with whispers. News traveled fast in glass buildings. Beth caught my eye as I passed, gave me a small thumbs up behind her desk where Colton couldn't see. My office felt different now. Smaller maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. A pretty cage in a tower built by men who'd never wanted me there. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, finally back from IT. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My presentation, my research, my 8 weeks of work that had almost been my professional funeral. My phone buzzed. Gregory, coming home late. Dad needs me. Of course he did. Gregory always went where he was needed, and it was never to me. I worked until the office emptied, until the only sounds were the hum of computers and the distant noise of cleaning crews. At 9:30 I finally closed my laptop and gathered my things. The drive home was quiet. The house was dark when I arrived. Gregory still at the office, still choosing sides in a war he refused to acknowledge existed. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my home office, staring at the wall of certificates and awards. Summa cum laude from Northwestern. Analytics Excellence Award. Innovation in Data Science. All those achievements, and I was still just the woman who'd married into the Whitmore family. My phone rang at exactly 10 p.m. Unknown number. Sophia? This is Victoria Morrison. My wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. Mrs. Morrison. I wasn't expecting. I'll be direct. I want to offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Predictive Analytics at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. 800,000 base, plus equity, plus a signing bonus that should adequately compensate you for any complications from leaving your current position. The room spun slightly. That's incredibly generous, but you're worried about the non-compete. I've had my legal team review it. Client companies aren't considered competitors. You'd be free to join us immediately. Victoria's words echoed in my ear as I set the phone down. $800,000. Equity. Freedom from Colton's suffocating control. All I had to do was say yes. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. The next morning, Gregory was gone before dawn. Another emergency meeting with his father. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in 3 years, and drove to the downtown public library. Using Whitmore Analytics computers for research would be like sending Colton a detailed report of my plans. The library's archived business journals went back decades. I started with Chicago 2018, Whitmore Analytics Midwest Division. The articles were buried deep, but they were there. Major pharmaceutical contract lost due to strategic disputes. Whitmore Midwest restructures after client exodus. And then the smoking gun. An interview with Victoria Morrison in Pharma Executive Quarterly. We require partners who can evolve with the industry, she'd said. Unfortunately, some firms remain stuck in outdated methodologies, unable to adapt to changing market dynamics. The article didn't name Colton directly, but the timeline was clear. Morrison Pharmaceuticals terminated their contract in March. By September, Whitmore Midwest had collapsed. I photographed every page with my personal phone. No trail, no evidence I'd been looking. My phone buzzed. A text from Beth. Can we meet? Urgent. Not at office. I found her at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Whitmore Analytics, hunched in a corner booth. She looked older than her 52 years, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around her cup like it was a lifeline. I can't do this anymore, she said before I even sat down. What he makes me do, it's wrong. Beth, what are you talking about? She pulled out a small notebook, hands shaking. Your emails. He has me forward everything to a private server. Every contact you make, every meeting you schedule. She stopped, tears forming. What? He has me track your personal calendar. Your doctor's appointments. He wanted to know if you were trying to have children. My stomach turned. Why would he care about that? I don't know. He just said to report everything. When you had your annual exam last month, he asked specifically about birth control prescriptions. Beth's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Sophia. My daughter, she has lupus. The treatments aren't covered by insurance. I need this job, the health benefits, but what I'm doing to you. I reached across the table, took her trembling hands. You're not doing anything to me. He is. There's more. She flipped through her notebook. Phone logs. He records your calls from the office line. And last week he had me pull your personnel file. Not just performance reviews. Everything. Background check, credit report, even your parents' information. My parents. They live in Ohio. They have nothing to do with. I know. But he wanted leverage. That's what he called it. Leverage. I photographed her notebook pages while she kept watch. 3 years of surveillance, documented in Beth's careful handwriting. Why are you telling me this now? Because what happened yesterday, that presentation, that was evil. And you still won. You turned his trap into triumph. She wiped her eyes. My daughter just turned 18. She'll age into her father's insurance next month. I can finally leave. We sat in silence for a moment, two women bound by different chains to the same terrible man. Beth, would you be willing to document all of this officially? If needed. She nodded slowly. After next month. After my daughter is safe. I left the coffee shop with more evidence than I'd expected and a fury that burned cold in my chest. But the day's revelations weren't over. When I returned home, a silver Mercedes sat in our driveway. Margaret Whitmore emerged, elegant in cream cashmere and pearls, looking exactly like the society matron she'd become after divorcing Colton 15 years ago. We need to talk, she said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into my house. She settled into my living room like she owned it, which technically she probably did. The house was in Gregory's name, purchased with family money. I heard about yesterday's performance, she said. Impressive. Also foolish. Excuse me. You embarrassed Colton publicly. You showed strength. That's not something Whitmore men tolerate in their women. She studied her manicured nails. I should know. I made the same mistake 30 years ago. What are you talking about? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You think you're the first woman to marry into this family with ambition? I had my MBA from Wharton. I was running the emerging markets division when I met Colton. Young, brilliant, full of ideas. Her voice softened. Just like you. But you divorced him. You got out. After 20 years. After 2 children. After signing agreements that would make your head spin. She pulled a document from her purse. This might look familiar. It was a buyout agreement, dated 2008. Margaret had signed away all rights to her business ventures, innovations and client relationships in exchange for a comfortable settlement and silence. He'll offer you something similar soon, she said. A generous package to disappear quietly. Take it. Why would I? Because the alternative is worse. She leaned forward. Whitmore men don't just defeat their enemies. They destroy them. Systematically. Completely. I watched Colton do it to 3 executives who challenged him. One ended up having a nervous breakdown. Another was blacklisted from the entire industry. And the third was me. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I fought for 2 years. Cost me my career, my reputation, most of my friends. In the end, I took the money and reinvented myself as a charity fundraiser. It's a nice life, but it's not the life I'd planned. You're telling me to give up. I'm telling you to survive. There are battles worth fighting and wars worth losing. Learn the difference. She left me with the old agreement and a warning. Check your prenup, dear. Really read it this time. That night, while Gregory attended another emergency meeting with his father, I spread our prenuptial agreement across my desk. I'd signed it 3 years ago, young and in love, trusting Gregory when he said it was just standard protection. Page by page, I read what I'd actually agreed to. Most of it was typical asset division, spousal support terms. But buried in Section 12, subsection F, was a clause that made my blood freeze. In the event of pregnancy or birth of children, all intellectual property developed during the marriage, regardless of previous provisions, becomes joint marital property subject to equal division upon dissolution. Equal division. Meaning if I had a child and then divorced Gregory, Colton could claim 50% of everything I'd created. My patents, my algorithms, my life's work. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the past month's conversations. Colton's sudden interest in grandchildren. Gregory's increasing comments about starting a family. His mother's casual mentions of how nice it would be to have little ones around. It wasn't about legacy or love. It was about legal theft. My laptop dinged with an email. From Colton, sent to the entire executive team. Please join me in congratulating Gregory and Sophia as they prepare for the next chapter of their lives. We look forward to growing our Whitmore family. My phone immediately exploded with texts. Congratulations. When are you due? So exciting. I wasn't pregnant. Had never indicated I was. But Colton had just announced it to everyone who mattered, creating a narrative I'd have to publicly deny or privately accept. The front door opened. Gregory's footsteps, heavier than usual. Sophie. His voice carried a strange tone. We need to talk about starting our family. I stood there holding the prenup with trembling hands as Gregory waited for my response about starting a family. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Your father just announced to the entire executive team that I'm pregnant, I said, my voice eerily calm. Gregory's face went pale. He what? Check your email. He pulled out his phone and I watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. Sophie, I didn't know he was going to. Of course you didn't. You never know what he's going to do. That's your superpower, isn't it? Willful ignorance. That's not fair. Fair. I held up the prenup. Was hiding this clause about children fair? If I have a baby, I lose rights to my intellectual property. Your father could claim half of everything I've created. I didn't know about that clause. You signed it too, Gregory. Your name is right there. He sank into the armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. We need to correct this. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. No. I set down the document. First, I need to show you something. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been collecting. The Chicago articles. Beth's surveillance notes. His mother's old buyout agreement. For the next hour, I laid out the truth about his father. Not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but the systematic destroyer of careers and lives. Gregory's face grew paler with each revelation. When I showed him the evidence of offshore accounts Beth had found, accounts siphoning money from Whitmore Analytics, he finally spoke. This can't be real. It's all real. And there's more. Tomorrow I'm meeting with 3 people your father destroyed. Maybe after hearing their stories, you'll finally understand who you're defending. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes outside the city to a truck stop diner where no one from Whitmore Analytics would ever venture. They were already there when I arrived. 3 ghosts from Colton's past, gathered in a corner booth like survivors of the same war. Sarah Chin, no relation despite the shared surname, looked nothing like the brilliant analyst from her old company photos. Stress had aged her 10 years in 3. She developed the algorithm that became the foundation of Whitmore's predictive modeling system. He called it collaborative development, she said, stirring her coffee absently. Said we were a team. Then one day my keycard stopped working. Security escorted me out. The next week he announced his breakthrough innovation to the board. Marcus Thompson, former CFO, had kept meticulous records. I found discrepancies. $3 million routed through shell companies in Delaware. When I brought it to the board, Colton had already poisoned them against me. Said I was embezzling. The investigation cleared me, but the damage was done. No one would hire me. The third was Robert Jameson, Colton's former business partner from 20 years ago. We built the company together. 50-50 partnership. Then his lawyer found a technicality in our operating agreement. I lost everything overnight. My wife left me. My kids won't speak to me. All because I suggested we should modernize our approach. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Because you're the first person who might actually be able to stop him, Robert said. You have something we didn't, evidence, allies, and leverage. They spent the next 2 hours sharing documents they'd saved, connections they'd maintained, wounds that had never healed. Sarah had emails showing Colton's pattern of intellectual property theft. Marcus had financial records suggesting fraud. Robert had correspondence proving Colton had planned his betrayal for months. There's a board meeting next month, Robert said. Quarterly review. Colton's planning to restructure, eliminate several positions. Yours is probably on the list. How do you know? Because I still have friends there. Good people too scared to speak up. But if someone gave them a reason, a real chance at change. I left the diner with a flash drive full of evidence and a plan forming in my mind. But I needed more than historical grievances. I needed current proof and powerful allies. Victoria Morrison agreed to meet me for lunch at her private club downtown. She listened to everything, her expression never changing, fingers steepled under her chin. I suspected as much, she said when I finished. Colton's reputation precedes him, though few dare speak openly about it. Will you help? I already am. The contract we're signing specifically requires your involvement. If you leave Whitmore Analytics, the deal becomes void. That's $5 million in leverage. She signaled the waiter for more wine. But you need more than that. You need the board on your side. They're all his friends. No, they're businessmen. Show them Colton is bad for business and they'll turn on him faster than you can blink. She pulled out her phone. I sit on 3 boards with members of Whitmore's board. Let me make some calls. The quarterly meeting would be the perfect stage for your revelations. That evening I found Beth still at her desk long after everyone else had left. I need one more favor, I said. She looked up, fear flashing across her face. Sophia, I can't. Just listen. I'm not asking you to steal anything or risk your job. I just need you to do what Colton already asks. Document everything. But make copies. Real copies. Over the next 3 weeks, Beth became my silent partner in building an unassailable case. Every email Colton sent pressuring board members. Every document he altered before meetings. Every communication showing his manipulation and control. The hardest conversation came on a Thursday night, 3 days before the board meeting. I'd prepared dinner. Gregory's favorite, salmon with asparagus, the meal I'd cooked on our first anniversary when things were still good between us. We need to talk, I said as he sat down. About Dad's announcement? I've already told people it was a misunderstanding. About your father's crimes. And what you're going to do about them. I laid out everything. The evidence. The testimonies. The financial fraud. The lives destroyed. Gregory sat there, his salmon growing cold, his face cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. You want me to betray my father. I want you to choose between being complicit in his crimes or being the man I thought I married. Sophie, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I stood, pushing my untouched plate aside. The board meeting is in 3 days. Either you stand with me and tell the truth or you stand with him and become just another enabler. There's no middle ground anymore. Gregory sat at that table for 2 hours after I went to bed. At midnight I heard his car start. Through the window I watched him drive away, heading toward his father's house. I didn't know what he would choose. But I knew that regardless of his decision I was done being silent. Gregory didn't come home that night. Or the next. His absence filled our bedroom with a silence that felt like held breath. The morning of the board meeting I dressed in my sharpest suit, black with a burgundy silk blouse, the color of controlled fire. My hands were steady as I applied my lipstick. This was war and I was done pretending otherwise. I arrived at Whitmore Analytics at 6:30, 2 hours before the meeting. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and the overnight cleaning crew finishing their rounds. Perfect. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass fortress where Colton held court. I'd never been inside during an actual board meeting. Spouses weren't invited to those sacred gatherings. But today I wasn't coming as a spouse. Each board member's place was already set with their nameplate, water glass, and meeting agenda. I pulled out 9 USB drives from my bag, each one containing the same explosive content. Colton's offshore accounts, the testimonials from 15 former employees he'd destroyed, the Morrison contract with its non-negotiable clause requiring my involvement, and Beth's meticulous documentation of his corporate abuse. I placed each drive precisely beside each notepad, then picked up Colton's agenda. He'd buried my performance review and recommended termination as item 7, probably hoping the board would be tired and compliant by then. Too bad they'd have plenty to discuss before we got that far. You're here early. I spun around. Gregory stood in the doorway looking haggard. He hadn't shaved and his suit was the same one he'd worn 3 days ago. Where have you been? Thinking. Reviewing files. Making choices. He entered the room slowly like he was walking through quicksand. I know what you're planning. Are you here to stop me? I'm here to help you. The words hung between us. I searched his face for deception, for the weakness I'd grown accustomed to, but found something else. Resolve maybe. Or just exhaustion with living a lie. I've been at the office, he continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Going through financial records I should have examined years ago. Dad's been stealing from the company. From our shareholders. From everyone. He handed me the folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, a clear trail of embezzlement spanning 5 years. All bearing Colton's signature. All hidden in accounts Gregory was supposed to oversee as CFO. You knew. I suspected. But suspecting and proving are different things. And proving requires courage I didn't have until now. He met my eyes. I'm sorry it took me so long. By 8:30, Board members began arriving. Through the glass walls, I watched them find the USB drives, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they plugged them into their laptops. Richard Hamilton, the chairman, looked particularly grim as he scrolled through the evidence. Colton arrived at 8:45, striding in with his usual confidence. He didn't notice the USB drives. His assistant usually set up his technology. He was too busy reviewing his notes for my professional execution. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Hamilton began once everyone was seated. Before we address the official agenda, we need to discuss some concerning materials that have come to our attention. Colton's head snapped up. What materials? These. Richard held up the USB drive. Sophia, I believe you distributed these? I did. Colton's face darkened. My daughter-in-law has no standing in this meeting. She should be removed immediately. Actually, Gregory said, his voice carrying across the room, she's here as a key employee whose termination you've proposed. She has every right to defend herself. The father and son locked eyes across the table. The resemblance between them had never been more striking or more tragic. Additionally, Gregory continued, standing now, as CFO, I need to present some urgent financial discrepancies I've discovered. This is highly irregular, Colton started. So is embezzlement, Gregory said quietly. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, demanded explanations. Colton's carefully controlled meeting devolved into chaos. Richard Hamilton pounded his gavel for order. Mr. Whitmore, Colton, these are serious allegations. The evidence on these drives suggests systematic fraud. Those documents are taken out of context, Colton said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disgruntled employee and my own son, who's being manipulated by his wife. Manipulated. I stood, my voice cutting through the noise. Like Sarah Chin was manipulated when you stole her algorithm? Like Marcus Thompson when you framed him for embezzlement? Or Robert Jameson when you destroyed your partnership? Each name landed like a physical blow. Colton's face went from red to white. The conference phone in the center of the table suddenly lit up. Richard answered it. Mr. Hamilton? This is Victoria Morrison. I understand you're discussing Sophia Whitmore's position with the company. Victoria's voice filled the room through the speakers. She timed this perfectly. Mrs. Morrison, we're in a board meeting. I'll be brief. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' $5 million contract explicitly requires Mrs. Whitmore's leadership. If she's terminated, our contract becomes void immediately. I should also mention I've been in communication with several of your other major clients. As if on cue, Richard's assistant rushed in with a tablet. Sir, urgent messages from Henderson Industries, the Zhao Group, Brennan Enterprises and 3 others. They're all saying the same thing. Richard read from the tablet, his face growing paler with each word. If Sophia Whitmore is removed from their accounts, they'll terminate their contracts immediately. This is extortion. Colton slammed his hand on the table. No, a familiar voice said from the doorway. This is justice. Margaret Whitmore entered, flanked by 2 lawyers. She looked magnificent, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of quiet power that comes from old money and older secrets. Hello, Colton. Board members. She nodded graciously. I believe there's some confusion about company ownership. Margaret, you have no standing here. Actually, I do. She handed Richard a thick document. During our divorce, I retained 40% of founding shares in Whitmore Analytics. Colton assured me they were symbolic non-voting shares. My lawyers have recently discovered otherwise. Richard's eyes widened as he read. These are voting shares. Full voting rights. Which means, Margaret continued, I'm the largest individual shareholder in this company. She looked directly at Colton. You've held this company hostage for 20 years. Hidden profits, destroyed careers, built your empire on the backs of people you've crushed. It ends today. You can't do this, Colton said, but his voice was hollow. I built this company. We built this company, Margaret corrected. Before you decided I was too ambitious for a Whitmore wife. Before you made me choose between my career and my children. Before you broke me into pieces and bought my silence. She turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled, really smiled. But some chains need breaking, don't they, Sophia? The board voted within the hour. It wasn't close. The vote was unanimous. 12 hands raised against the man who'd built this empire, who'd ruled it with an iron fist for 2 decades. Richard Hamilton's voice was steady as he read the resolution. Effective immediately, Colton Whitmore is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Analytics. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Colton stood there, his usual commanding presence crumbling like a sand castle against the tide. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, 63 years carved into deep lines around his eyes, silver hair no longer distinguished but just gray. Furthermore, Richard continued, the board appoints Sophia Whitmore as Interim Chief Analytics Officer, with full authority over the Morrison Project and our other pharmaceutical accounts. Security had been called, standard procedure, Richard assured everyone, though we all knew it was more than that. 2 guards stood by the door waiting. Colton gathered his leather portfolio with mechanical precision, his movements slow and deliberate. As he passed my chair he stopped. Our eyes met, his gray gaze no longer cold but something else entirely. Confusion? Respect? Or just the bewildered recognition of seeing himself reflected in someone he'd tried to destroy? Well played, he said quietly so only I could hear. Then louder, addressing the room with a ghost of his old authority. I built this company from nothing. Remember that when it all falls apart. The guards escorted him out, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Through the glass walls, I watched employees stand from their desks, witnessing the impossible, Colton Whitmore being removed from his own kingdom. Margaret broke the silence. That went better than expected. He didn't even invoke the Founder's Clause. Would it have mattered? Richard asked. No. But it would have been Messier. He turned to me. The office is yours now. Everything in it. The meeting continued for another hour. Transition protocols, client notifications, legal procedures, but I barely heard any of it. I'd won. After 3 years of subtle abuse, public humiliation and systematic undermining, I'd won. So why did I feel so empty? Gregory found me in the bathroom afterward, splashing cold water on my face. You did it, he said to my reflection in the mirror. We did it. Your testimony about the financial records. Stop. He held up his hand. Don't give me credit I don't deserve. I should have done that 2 years ago. 1 year ago. Any time before today. I turned to face him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. The golden boy was tarnished. Dark circles, trembling hands, the weight of his choices etched into premature lines around his mouth. I need to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a note-taking app, scrolled through pages and pages of entries. I've been seeing Dr. Patterson for 6 months. Therapy. Dad didn't know. Each entry was dated, documenting his internal struggle. October 15th. S presented brilliant analysis at meeting. Dad credited it to team effort. Should have spoken up. Didn't. Coward. November 2nd. Dad changed S's presentation without telling her. Watched her scramble. Said nothing. Self-hatred growing. December 8th. S cried in the car after Dad's holiday party. Wanted to comfort her. Couldn't find words. What kind of husband am I? Gregory. There's more. So much more. Every time I failed you I wrote it down. Like somehow documenting my cowardice would make it better. His voice cracked. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for to become someone worth forgiving. The bathroom door opened. Beth poked her head in. Sophia? They need you in. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay, Beth. I'll be right there. She nodded and left. Gregory stepped back, creating space between us. We'll talk tonight, I said. At home. Home, he repeated like he was testing whether the words still applied. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and transitions. By 5 o'clock I stood alone in what had been Colton's office. The space felt too large, too cold with its modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His presence still lingered, cologne, leather, and something harder to define. Power maybe. Or just fear. I was studying the view when I heard footsteps in the parking garage through the open window. 7 floors down, but the acoustics carried. I looked out and saw him, Colton, standing by my car. I took the elevator down, my heels clicking against the concrete as I approached him. He looked smaller here, without his office fortress, without his army of employees. Waiting to slash my tires? I asked. He almost smiled. Too crude. Not my style. Then what? He leaned against my car, suddenly looking exhausted. You remind me of someone. Who? Myself. 35 years ago. He stared at the concrete wall like it held memories. My father-in-law owned a consulting firm. Brought me in after I married Patricia. His daughter, Margaret's older sister. Did you know that? I shook my head. He made my life miserable. Every idea dismissed, every success credited to family connections. Sound familiar? He laughed bitterly. I fought back. Took over his company. Destroyed him completely. Patricia never forgave me. Divorced me a year later. I married Margaret on the rebound, thought I could do better the second time. Instead you became him. Worse. I became what I thought he was. Turned out he was just a scared old man trying to hold on to what he'd built. He straightened, adjusted his tie out of habit. You won today, Sophia. But winning and living with winning, those are different things. Rain started falling, light at first, then heavier. Colton had no umbrella, no coat, things that were always handled by assistants who no longer worked for him. I could have been better, he said quietly. To Margaret. To Gregory. But being better requires admitting you were wrong, and I've spent so long being right that I forgot how. He walked away into the rain, his expensive suit darkening with water, his shoulders bent against more than just weather. I stood there watching until his figure disappeared around the corner. When I got home, Gregory was in the living room with Chinese takeout, from the place we'd ordered from on our first date back when everything seemed possible. I thought you might be too tired to cook, he said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, eating in silence for a while. Then he pulled out a leather journal. This is everything, he said, placing it between us. Every time I failed you. Every time I chose comfort over courage. Every time I let him hurt you because I was too scared to stop him. Why document it? Because Dr. Patterson said I needed to see the pattern. To understand that each small betrayal was a choice. He set down his chopsticks. I chose wrong, Sophie. Every single time. And now I'm choosing differently. I stood up in that boardroom. I provided evidence against my own father. It's not enough, I know that. But it's a start. We can't just reset, Gregory. Too much has happened. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if maybe we could try something different. Not husband and wife, not right away. Maybe just two people figuring out if there's anything left worth saving. That night he slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. I heard him on the phone with Dr. Patterson, scheduling extra sessions. Through the door I heard him crying, deep, ugly sobs of a man finally facing himself. The next morning I signed the Morrison contract in what had been Colton's office. $5 million over 3 years with performance bonuses that could double it. Congratulations, Victoria said, shaking my hand. You've earned this. But as I looked at Colton's nameplate still sitting on the desk, Margaret's warning echoed, Whitmore men break women slowly. I feel like I've become him, I admitted to Victoria. I destroyed him the same way he tried to destroy me. Victoria studied me carefully. Did you lie? Steal? Fabricate evidence? No. Then you didn't become him. You survived him. There's a difference. She moved to the window, looking out at the city. Surviving isn't becoming, Sophia. It's transcending. Remember that. Victoria's words stayed with me as she left that day. Surviving isn't becoming. It's transcending. 6 months had passed since that boardroom confrontation, and I was finally beginning to understand what she meant. The morning sun streamed through the office windows. My office now, though I'd replaced Colton's cold modern furniture with warmer pieces that actually invited people to sit and talk. The earnings report on my desk showed a 30% revenue increase. The Morrison contract had attracted other pharmaceutical giants. Whitmore Analytics was thriving, but more importantly, it was healing. Your 9 o'clock is here, Beth announced from the doorway, no longer the anxious woman who'd once spied for Colton. As chief of staff, she'd blossomed into someone I barely recognized, confident, decisive, protective of the culture we were building together. Send them in. Sarah Chin entered, the analyst whose algorithm Colton had stolen 3 years ago. She'd been my first rehire, brought back with a formal apology and the title of Senior Innovation Director she'd always deserved. "The predictive model is exceeding projections," she said, setting down her tablet. "Morrison's competitors are inquiring about licensing. What do you think?" She smiled, something she rarely did before. "I think we're just getting started." After she left, I stood by the window watching the city below. Somewhere down there, Colton worked in a small consulting firm, his empire reduced to a single office and 2 employees. I'd heard he was doing pro bono work for startups, perhaps trying to balance some cosmic scale. Gregory said his father seemed smaller but somehow more at peace. They met for coffee once a month now, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. Gregory and I had our own reconstruction project. We'd separated 4 months ago. Not a divorce but a recognition that we needed to learn who we were individually before we could know who we might be together. He'd moved into a downtown apartment, started intensive therapy 3 times a week, and began working with a different division of the company where he could build his own reputation. Twice a week we had dinner. Not as husband and wife, but as 2 people carefully exploring whether there was something worth salvaging in the wreckage of our marriage. Last Tuesday he'd actually made me laugh. Really laugh, for the first time in 2 years. My phone buzzed. "Emma, final fitting in an hour. Don't be late." My sister's wedding was this weekend. A simple outdoor ceremony, nothing like the Whitmore social production mine had been. I arrived at the bridal shop to find her spinning in front of mirrors, radiant in ivory silk. "You look perfect," I said, meaning it. "You look happy," she countered. "Really happy. Not that fake smile you wore for 3 years." "I'm getting there." She adjusted her veil, studying me in the mirror. "Is Gregory coming to the wedding?" "He's invited. Whether he comes is up to him." "And you're okay with that?" "I'm learning to be okay with uncertainty." The wedding day arrived with perfect September weather. I stood beside Emma as her maid of honor, holding her bouquet while she exchanged vows with David, a teacher like her who looked at my sister like she hung the moon. During the reception, my father pulled me aside for our father-daughter dance. "I owe you an apology," he said as we swayed to the music. "For what?" "For pushing you toward Gregory. For saying he was good enough for you." I was blinded by the Whitmore name, the success, the image. He spun me gently. "You were always good enough on your own, Sophie. I should have seen that." "We all got blinded by the shine," I said. "The important thing is we can see clearly now." Halfway through the reception, Gregory arrived. Alone. He'd had a major client meeting in Boston but had flown back specifically for this. His rental car was still running in the parking lot when he walked in, slightly out of breath, carrying a gift I knew he'd picked out himself because the wrapping was terrible. "You made it," Emma said, genuinely surprised. "I promised I would." He looked at me. "I'm trying to keep promises these days." When the band played a slow song, he approached tentatively. "Would you like to dance?" I hesitated, then took his offered hand. We moved awkwardly at first, both trying to remember how we used to fit together. Then he said, "Remember our first dance? At that terrible club in Wicker Park. You stepped on my feet 3 times. But you kept dancing with me anyway. I thought you had potential. Do you still?" I looked up at him, really looked. He'd lost weight but in a healthy way. The therapy was working. I could see it in how he held himself, no longer constantly checking over his shoulder for his father's approval. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm willing to find out." Monday morning I called an all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed, energy buzzing through the space. I announced Beth's daughter had been accepted into a clinical trial for an experimental lupus treatment, fully funded by the company's new employee assistance program. The applause was thunderous. Marcus Thompson was there too, hired back as CFO after his reputation was restored. Robert Jameson consulted for us now, his expertise invaluable. Even some of Colton's enablers had transformed, freed from the culture of fear he'd cultivated. "We're not just rebuilding," I told them. "We're reimagining what a company can be." That evening I stood in my office as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 2 contracts lay on my desk, both life-changing, both terrifying in different ways. The first was from Victoria Morrison, a permanent position as Executive Vice President at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. Double my current salary, mentorship from one of the industry's pioneers, a chance to build something entirely my own. The second was an acquisition offer. With Margaret's backing and several investors, I could buy majority control of Whitmore Analytics, truly transform it from the ground up. Make it mine in every way that mattered. My phone chimed. Gregory, I'm at the grocery store. Thought I'd cook dinner tonight. Your place or mine? Or should we try something neutral? There's that new place on Michigan Avenue. Or we could just talk about the future. Whatever that means for us. His uncertainty made me smile. The old Gregory would have made the decision for both of us. This version was learning to ask, to wait, to let me choose too. I looked at the contracts again, then at the city spreading endlessly beyond my window. 6 months ago I'd thought revenge would be the ending, the final chapter where justice was served and the villain fell. But standing here now, I realized it had never been about endings. It was about beginnings. About choosing who to become when the chains finally break. About learning that transcending isn't about forgetting the past but about refusing to let it define your future. I picked up my phone to text Gregory back, then stopped. Some decisions deserved more than words on a screen. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, leaving both contracts unsigned on the desk. Tomorrow I would choose. Tonight I just wanted to have dinner with someone I was still getting to know, and talk about futures that were finally ours to write. If this story of corporate revenge and redemption kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Victoria Morrison turned Colton's own trap into Sophia's launching pad. That conference room reversal was pure brilliance. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of underdogs fighting back. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.